Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Rash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Being raised in a devoutly religious, conservative home, sex is a difficult topic to see with fresh eyes. I was thinking about how I was raised, and not just my home, but all the homes that I know about, all the people, the friends that I had, our entire culture, our whole community. Sex was like the elephant in the room. It was something that everybody secretly wanted to talk about, but it was taboo. It was tainted. It was posited as something that was beautiful. Sex is designed by God to be enjoyed between a married man and a married woman. But I never got the sex talk growing up. Never. I never said a word about it. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Not a peep. I remember the first time I was pretty young, and someone said to me, "You know it that a man sticks his in her," and I remember just probably going sheet white and saying, "No, no, that's not true." And if it hadn't been for my own brother, you know, when I was a young teenager, going, "All right, look, mom and dad are never going to tell you this, but let me spell some things." That and late night cable, I would be screwed. You know, I think about how religious and conservative communities treat the issue of sex. And I often say it this way. I say, rarely is the church as ham-handed as it is when it is dealing with sexual issues. It is almost bipolar. And we're going to talk about that. The problems, the duality that the church has and religious homes have when dealing with sex. We're going to talk about shame. We're going to talk about people who were, how else do I say, repressed, oppressed? Were they tainted? Were they made to feel shameful about their bodies? Were they afraid? We'll talk about what is a healthy sex life. When should it begin? We'll talk about teen sex. We're going to talk about as much as we can here in the next 90 minutes. Now, coming up later on in the show, I am going to be speaking with Daryl Ray. He's the author of a book called The God Virus, How Religion Infects Our Lives and Culture. And he's got a great perspective, and we're going to chat with him. And I believe he's also going to take some of your calls if you have some questions. But first, I had a chance yesterday to speak for about 20 minutes with Dr. Marty Klein. Now, Marty Klein has been, he's a licensed marriage and family therapist. He's a certified sex therapist, and he has been for like 3 decades. He's had publications in Parents Magazine and New Woman, even Playboy. He's written 7 books, including one that releases today. And he was only available to speak late last night. He's on the West Coast, so it was 10 o'clock his time, midnight my time. And so I was a little punchy when we spoke. I was like half awake. I'm a morning guy. And it was only afterward that I kind of regretted not asking a few questions, some follow-up questions. There were some things that came out of the conversation that I wish I had followed up on because they were pretty heavy concepts for me, and they might be for you too. But for your approval, let me play the conversation. My 20 minutes with Dr. Marty Klein. Well, Dr. Klein, I came from a conservative Christian home. A wonderful, loving home. And it was 30 years in the faith before I ultimately came to reject religion. And I will say that growing up, we didn't use the words penis and vagina in a sentence. You know what I'm saying? It's not something that we really spoke about. There seems to be, I don't know if the word shame is the correct word? What word would you use when it comes to religious, conservative, mainstream religious households? There's almost a kind of a two-faced approach to it. On one hand, they treat sex like God's miracle, and on the other hand, it's something that we should sweep under the rug and not speak about. What has been your experience?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on the essential ambivalence of the religious community about sexuality. The ambivalence that, on the one hand, sex is divine. It's according to the Old Testament. When God created Adam, he breathed life into Adam, and I conceptualize, for my religious patients, I conceptualize that breath as the breath of eroticism. So on the one hand, the religious community thinks of sexuality as having this divine aspect. On the other hand, the religious community thinks of sexuality as being dangerous, as the human body as being shameful and dangerous, as sexuality as something that needs to be controlled and constricted as much as possible.
I've heard from a lot of people who come from extremely conservative Christian homes and other religions, and they were warned about sex. They were essentially hearing about sexual activity with only the negative. It is dangerous. It is a covenant that is designed for marriage. Cover yourself up. Try to ignore the natural feelings, the natural questions, the natural desires that you have. And so it must create entire generations of people who will grow up in conflict, right? Because they're repressing what is coming naturally. Is that accurate?
First of all, to maximize the credibility of the atheist, humanist, skeptic community, we want to recognize that religious people and people in the faith community do not have a monopoly on sexual repression. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, indeed, lots of people growing up in traditional religious homes or homes centered around faith traditions, they do learn a lot of really nasty stuff about their bodies and about sexual energy and about sexual activity. And for a lot of people, those lessons in childhood are reinforced, and cripples them for adult sexual pleasure, adult sexual intimacy, adult sexual self-expression.
Are we talking about people, communities, cultures that believe in sex only for the cause of procreation? They don't see it as a pleasurable act first?
Well, that's part of it. Although when you break that down, it's kind of interesting that people would say that if sex is only for procreation, is it okay if you have pleasure during the act of procreation? Some people say yes, some people say no. Some people say that enjoying sex even during the act of procreation dishonors the act of procreation. It's sort of interesting. That's like saying that, the act of enjoying food, the act of enjoying eating food, sort of dishonors the divine aspect of food. So,
what are some of the biggest mistakes that you think religious communities make when it comes to sex? What are some of the biggest patterns you see where they get it wrong?
Those are two different questions, mistakes and where they get it wrong. Certainly it starts with, is the human body dirty or not? Is the human body shameful or not? And, people try and have it both ways. Religious people try and have it both ways. They try and say that on the one hand, we're created in God's image. Well, if God don't make no junk, then why is some part of a religious person's body dirty? I mean, if you want to think that the elbow is dirty, it makes a little bit more sense that the penis would be dirty. But there's this fundamental concept that the human body is either dirty or shameful. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing after that is that sexual energy is to be mistrusted and that sexuality needs to be controlled. And then the third thing is that there's a very clear, bright line between godly sex and not godly sex. And what I tell my religiously oriented patients is that for sex to be godly, it doesn't matter what the activities are. What matters is the intention and the emotional connection and the emotional expression between people. There are plenty of people who are having heterosexual, monogamous, marital intercourse, and it's not godly. And then there are people who are hanging from the chandeliers, and the sex is definitely godly. So I think one of the ways that religious people can run into trouble is by believing that the way that you define godly sexual acts is by what the bodies are doing rather than by what's in people's minds and what's in people's hearts.
So people ask you the question, I want to do something besides the missionary position. This is somebody inside the church or someone from a conservative home. Is this okay to do, right? Does this cross the line between intimacy into sin and lust?
Well, people can ask me that question until the cows come home. That's a good example of a question that I would never, ever answer. Because if I say, don't worry about that, everybody does that. Don't worry about that, that's normal. The very next thing that they're going to say is, but my priest says it's not normal, my sister says it's not normal, Dr. Phil says it's not normal, the magazines I read say it's not normal, my husband says it's not normal. So I don't want to be part of the chorus of people who have opinions. I have actual expertise. What I would do is I would do something that's a lot less efficient than just telling somebody what I think or what they ought to do. I would help equip somebody to investigate the question of sexual decision making. When someone says, is it lust or is it okay? Is it intimate? Is it sinful? My job is to help people actually ask those questions and to evaluate the answers that they give themselves and to question the categories that they've been given. There's nothing more powerful than helping people to question the categories with which they understand the world. So rather than looking at sexuality as either lustful or intimate, for example, I would wonder, and I would invite a patient to investigate with me, are there any other categories with which we can conceptualize sexuality?
Many when I was growing up, obviously they were very concerned about teen sexuality. We're talking about issues like teen pregnancy and STDs and all of that. How do you approach the challenge of addressing sexually active teenagers?
Well, the first thing that I say is that the single most dangerous thing that any teenager does, whether they are sexually active or not, the single most dangerous thing that they do is that they text while they're riding a bicycle or driving a car. That's the single most dangerous thing a teenager does. The second most dangerous thing that a teenager does is they drink while they drive, or they drive with someone who has been drinking. That, I think, helps put things a little bit into perspective. And what I say is that if we give teenagers cell phones and we give teenagers driver's licenses, indeed, if we allow teenagers to be in the Army, if we give them cell phones, cars, and rifles, and trust them to make good decisions, and then we say that they can't make good decisions around sexuality, that says a lot more about adults and their anxiety about sex than it does about the real lived experience of teenagers.
I saw a episode of Penn and Teller a long time ago, and they actually went through the crew and asked them the age they lost their virginity, and it was amazing. 16, 17, 16, and it's probably been that way for generation, even though many cultures and communities may not have spoken aloud about it. Sexually active teenagers is absolutely nothing new, correct?
Well, there's two answers to that, three answers to that. The first is that sexually active teenagers is nothing new, correct. The second answer is the age at which teenagers have their first sexual experiences has been dropping in a linear fashion for the last century. And the third answer is that, teenagers 500 years ago were having sex, but back then it was called marriage. Up until around 1800 or 1850, the age of puberty and the age of first marriage was pretty much the same age. So people's bodies matured sexually. They got married right around the same time, and there was very little problem about sexually active, single, unmarried teenagers. What has happened in the last 150 years is that the age of sexual maturity of bodies has been declining, and the age of first marriage has been increasing. So now the age at which, say, American girls are having their periods is around 10 or 11. And the age at which those very same girls get married for the first time is typically 25. So any sex that these girls have between 11 and 25, or let's make it easier on the mind, the sex that any American teenager has between, say, 16 and 25 is going to be premarital sex. And that's a lot for our culture to swallow. We have essentially created, through education and nutrition and new concepts of lifestyle, we've created an entire class of unmarried sexually active people between the ages of 16 and 25, and we still don't have the social technology to deal with it.
Talking with Dr. Marty Klein, I want to talk about your new book, which releases today, by the way. But first, you have a book titled America's War on Sex, The Attack on Law, Lust, and Liberty. There's a war on sex. You want to explain?
Well, there are a lot of people in the religious community, as well as in the secular but conservative community, politically conservative community, who are using the issue of sexual regulation as a way to undermine democracy. Whether it's censoring the internet, whether it's limiting people's choices of medication or healthcare services, whether it's limiting people's recreational opportunities, whether it's limiting the kinds of information that children are allowed to have in school. What all these things have in common is sexuality, and there's a very, very powerful, very large lobby in the United States of religiously oriented people and political figures and the media and non-governmental institutions like morality and media who are devoted to limiting sexual expression wherever they find it. And the goal, for the most part, is to undermine the secular nature of the United States and replace that fundamental compact, that fundamental contract, with a contract that's centered around religious values and religious tradition. So you actually get people who say things like, there are certain medicines that young people should not have access to because it might make them more likely to be sexually active before they're married. And aside from the fact that the science says, no, that's actually not what happens when you give young people Gardasil, these injections that help protect young people against HPV. Aside from the fact that the science says, no, that's not what happens, my answer to that is essentially, so what? Preventing young people or discouraging young people from having sex is not a legitimate public policy goal, whereas protecting their physical health or their mental health is a legitimate public policy goal. So the war on sex is a coalition. It's a financial coalition. It's a lobbying coalition of the religious right, of certain media organizations like Fox, of lots and lots of politicians, and of other people who are determined to restrict the sexual choices of Americans and to replace the secular rules of American democracy with religious tradition and religious rules.
Is there a region of the world, in your opinion, that you think just really has a healthy outlook on sex, that they just got it right? Is there a part of the world where you think, yeah, they're not repressed, they get it?
Oh, I know this couple down the street. Their home is a place. Well, I think what's accurate is that there are lots of places around the world in which they get some parts of sexuality pretty right. In Southern Europe, for example, virtually every beach is either a topless beach or a nude beach. In Northern Europe, there are some countries where young people are encouraged to talk at the dinner table about sexual decision-making. In India, they have lots of ancient temples, the temples being the size of a church, that are just covered with erotic carvings, and young children are allowed to see that. In the United States, teenagers are allowed to walk around in sexually provocative clothing. So here are just some examples from around the world where various cultures get some part of sexuality right. Is there a place where the whole culture gets the whole thing right? I've been to a lot of places, and mostly they're distinguished by what they get wrong. Brazil gets a lot of things right. Holland gets a lot of things right. And frankly, the U.S. gets some things right. Like I said, for example, we let young people go on dates unchaperoned. In most of the world, 15-year-old boys and 15-year-old girls who are not related are not allowed to go off someplace in private, like a movie or a car or a park or a museum. So even we get some things right. But sexuality has a lot of aspects, and it's hard to find a place where they get it all right.
You can understand that. I'm sure there are parents listening right now who are probably thinking, wow, I mean, it's healthy for teenagers to wear sexually provocative clothing. It's healthy for them to be in a car at midnight in a strange place. I mean, this is pretty hardcore territory for parents with, say, a 14, 15, 16-year-old in the house. I can certainly understand that. I think if I was, if I had a teenage girl, I'd probably, they say put them in a barrel with a knothole in it. When they turn 16, you seal up the knothole. That's exactly how I would feel. I would want to protect them from the world. But you're saying that expressions of sexuality, even in early teens, is healthy?
Oh, I go way beyond that. I think I feel very strongly that we have to allow young people to express their sexuality one way or another from the time that they're babies, from the time that when they're 2-year-olds and they touch daddy's penis, the time when they're 5-year-olds and they look under Susie's dress, and the time that they're 8-year-olds and they say, "Mommy, what's a blowjob?" And the time that they're 14 years old and they say, "How will I know when it's time for sex?" And the time that they're 16-year-olds and they want to do dirty dancing. And human beings are sexual from the womb to the tomb. Human beings are sexual. They have the capacity for erotic expression their entire lives. And just like, on the one hand, we don't let our kids eat everything in sight, but we do teach them about nutrition. Well, we don't want our kids to have sex 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with strangers, but we do need to teach them how to take care of themselves sexually, how to take care of their bodies, how to make good sexual decisions. Why is it okay to masturbate in your own bedroom, but it's not okay to masturbate in church or at grandma's house? We only have two choices. We can facilitate the healthy sexual expression of children, or we can repress the sexual expression of children. There isn't a third way. And again, we're not talking about 8-year-olds having penis-vagina intercourse, but 8-year-olds have a lot of sexual curiosity. They have a lot of sexual feelings. They have a lot of sexual questions. They have a lot of sexual fantasies. When I was in when I was in first grade, one day my mother walked into her bedroom and saw me going through her perfume collection, and she asked me what was I doing, and I said, "I'm giving some perfume to Miss Herman, my first grade teacher." Now, that was a tremendously erotic thing for me. I was in love with my first grade teacher, and I wanted to give her the sexiest thing I could find, which at the ripe old age of 7 was perfume. Which sounds perfectly reasonable. The first thing my mother taught me is, first of all, if you want to give Miss Herman perfume, you got to take your money and you have to go buy some. You don't give her mine. What a brilliant thing to say. And then she said, "Now tell me all about your feelings for Miss Herman." And I told her I loved her and this and that, and my mother didn't freak out.
Talking here with Dr. Marty Klein, let's talk about your new book. It's called Sexual Intelligence: What We Really Want from Sex and How to Get It.
What this book is about is, what do people really want from sex? And if you ask most people, what do you want from sex? Most people say some combination of pleasure and closeness. And yet, if you talk to people about what they do sexually and what they're thinking about during sex and how they prepare for sexual activities and all of that, people are not focused nearly enough on pleasure and closeness. They're focused on how my belly looks. I hope I don't wet the bed. I hope I don't call my partner the wrong name. I hope I don't fart during sex. I wonder if my penis is as big as my wife's ex-boyfriend's. I hope I get it up. I hope I keep it up. I hope I don't come too soon. I hope I come at all. What people are focused on during sex typically does not contribute very much to the purposes that they're in bed for in the first place. And this book, Sexual Intelligence, is about what are the components of sexual intelligence? What are the skills we need to know? What is the relationship we need to have with our own body? What sorts of communication do we need to be able to do in order to create sexual experiences that we find both pleasurable and emotionally satisfying? Whether it's a one-night stand or whether you're with the same person for 50 years.
Is it about just being honest with yourself? Hey, who am I? What do I want? What rings my bell?
I wouldn't say it's just being honest with yourself, because being honest with yourself is really, really, really difficult and complicated, especially if you've been taught since you were young that the things that you're going to be honest with yourself about are bad or wrong. I mean, if you're a woman who likes oral sex, let's say, if you're a woman who likes when her partner goes down on her, and you've been taught since you were young that that's a dirty, disgusting thing that you have between your legs, you know that old, I think it was Saint Jerome or Saint Augustine who said, a woman's body is a temple built over a sewer. Isn't that charming?
Wow.
So if you've been taught all your life that what you have between your legs is dirty and disgusting, and yet you really, really want your partner to go down on you, or that's the only way you can have an orgasm, being honest with yourself would be tremendously difficult. And yet that's what we need to be able to do in order to be able to create satisfying sex. Be honest with ourselves. That's not the whole thing, but that is part of it.
Dr. Marty Klein, I'm so glad you spent some time with us. It's been very enlightening, and I encourage everybody to check out the book. It is available as of today, and it is called
Sexual Intelligence, What We Really Want from Sex and How to Get It. Available today from HarperCollins.
Dr. Marty Klein, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
When I was growing up, and I know they still have them today, the True Love Waits campaign for teenagers was very popular. The concept was you saved yourself for marriage, sexual purity. You would take a pledge. They have promise rings or these little pieces of jewelry that commemorate your vow to your future spouse and to God. And that is the background, the culture that I came from. Sex is dangerous, especially for teenagers, right? And it's difficult for me. I'm looking at it and listening to the perspective of a gentleman here who with a PhD, right? But I'm picturing in my mind, I'm thinking sex is healthy sexual activity, sexual exploration for a 14? They're not driving a car yet. They're not of eligible age to pick up a rifle and join the military. They are still minnows in this world. And that's a difficult leap for me to make. And I would welcome your perspective, obviously, on it, but not that curiosity should be quelled. And I honestly believe it's healthy for people to speak openly about sex, demystify sex for your kids. But if I was a father of a 15, 16-year-old girl, and she was sexually active, as a father, it would be very difficult for me to see that as something positive. It's too soon. I wish they had waited. They have so much growing up to do. And then I turn around and I think, wait a minute. If it's a natural thing and they're going to be doing it anyway, educate them, keep them safe. I had an email from a young lady named Danielle. She said, I was raised in Texas in an extremely religious family with two grandfathers who were Southern Baptist preachers. I was taught abstinence from an early age, not because of STDs or pregnancy, but because God says so. I won't go into the details, but you've undoubtedly heard it from hundreds of others like me. When I was 18, I was a student in a Baptist school, and I was asked to lead a Disciple Now group. This is an annual youth group event in which the kids all split up into groups and spend the weekend in host homes. There are about 10 teens, one gender per home, obviously, and a college-age Bible study leader in each home. The kids spend the weekend in intensive Bible study and discussion about whatever the theme issue is. This particular weekend, the theme was abstinence. The leaders were given thick booklets with all the right words to say, and we were instructed to make sure that by Sunday night church, the kids were all ready to sign a pledge card promising to remain abstinent until marriage. At least half of my group was already sexually active, and I was appalled that all of the, quote, education they'd received about sex was along the same lines as the useless tripe I was feeding them. I was already struggling with my faith at this point, and I had a real problem with the angle of our prescribed lessons. My group heard about a lot more practicalities. STDs, pregnancy, the prevention of both, than biblical instruction. On Sunday night, several of my girls didn't want to sign the card, and I told them it was their private choice to make. When the other leaders saw this, they held those girls in a room until they each signed it. I'm still haunted by this. It was in the days before cell phones, and I shared a dorm with fellow leaders, so I couldn't give them my number to tell them to call anytime. I had to leave them behind in the hands of the people whose only answer to the very real questions they had was, God says it's a sin. I'm now a mother, a professional, a volunteer sex education speaker, and a volunteer for our chapter of the National Network of Abortion Funds. Thank you so much for the message. Let's talk to Roger, who has been on hold patiently for about 20 minutes. Thanks for waiting. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Do you have a perspective or a story for me, Roger?
Well, I think a lot of it, you pretty much, in your other conversation, you pretty much nailed it, most of it on the head, I think. But a lot of it, we have problems with teen pregnancy and STDs and all of that. And I think a lot of that is partially because of all this shame that seems to surround it, because then, once they actually get out there and do something, they realize, hey, this feels good, and then they just go wild, and without being taught that, well, there are consequences.
Do you have teenage kids, may I ask?
No, I don't. My oldest daughter is actually 5.
Well, let's say she's 15. Doesn't something twist up in your gut as a father? I come from the background where, the teenage girl's about ready to start dating, and the fathers are already fantasizing about sitting on the front porch with a double-gauge shotgun, Son, tell me exactly what are your intentions, that kind of thing.
I admit that I've had, visions of, cleaning the barrel when, cleaning the gun when he brings the boy over, but I grew up in a religious house, but I grew up in a fairly, not a very strict one. My family went to the Morning Star Community Church here in Salem, so I didn't really have that shame when I was growing up. I was always told, you should wait till you find the right person, you should be careful and stuff like that. And the story that I have about that is that when my mom found out that I first had my girlfriend at the age of 17, my best friend at the time actually slipped the news to her, and right in front of him, she goes, do I need to buy you condoms? And that's kind of the kind of attitude I had growing up, was like, well, if you're going to do it, at least be careful. And, I'm going to have those visions of cleaning the barrel of the gun when she brings the boy over, but I'm personally going to try to have that same attitude of, if you're going to do it, please realize that there are consequences and be careful.
Well, I wish you the best with your baby girl, and I appreciate your perspective today. And thanks so much for being a part of the show, Roger. Thank you.
No problem.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for remaining on hold for about a half hour. You are on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Give me some wisdom. What do you think about all this?
Well, if there's a few things I'm passionate about, it's critical thinking and also, I think, sex education. I think it's very important that people feel very comfortable with their bodies, especially women. And I feel that, generically speaking, in our society, they often refer to men and women's sexual parts. Like, let's say you're talking to a kid. People will say the penis and the vagina. Well, it's not really correct. They should be saying, little Johnny has a penis, little Susie has a clitoris. And so often, I don't know, it just seems like they just kind of brush over the clitoris aspect of females. I got that line from Betty Dodson. Are you familiar with Betty Dodson?
I'm not.
Okay.
But I'm a total prude, so, I must be excused. Who's Betty Dodson?
Oh, no, she's been doing, I guess, if you look it up online, she has a whole website. I think she does some work with Carlin Ross, but she just promotes, sex education and just being comfortable with our bodies. Also, so often, like you guys were saying earlier, females, the vulva, all parts included, look so different on every woman. And so often people will be thinking that, what's wrong with my my stuff down there. It doesn't look normal. When actually, if you just go online and look at a variety of shapes, size, colors, whatever, I think a lot of women feel self-conscious about how they look down there, and they actually have surgeries you can have to correct stuff, which should not be corrected. It should be totally normal. And obviously their doctors would tell them that, but they're just sitting around at home thinking, I'm weird. Also, do you have Netflix?
Yes, I do.
You have the streaming. There's this really good show that I watched it's like a documentary. It's called Let's Talk About Sex. And they had this really was eye-opening. They had this interview where they went to, was it Dr. Klein? Was that his name?
Yes.
He talked about how Holland he mentioned them being very open about sexuality. Well, they did this interview where they asked high school age people in Holland, and they asked people in America about having condoms. And the people in the Netherlands, I guess they were saying, to a girl, they were like, what would you think if you went up to a guy and he did not have a condom on? Like the girl in Holland said, well, that would be scary. That would be weird. Like everyone should have them. And this was a girl that never actually had sexual intercourse at that point in her life. She was just saying she was that educated to know that, like, well, he should have a condom on, you know what I mean? Because that's the healthy thing. And then they interviewed people in America. They interviewed this, like a young lady, and they said, what if you were with a guy and he did not have, or he had a condom on him? And she's like, oh, I would think he's trying to, do something. They just look at that type of stuff as like, they think of, if you have a condom, you're trying to push, I don't know if this is making sense, but
I think I understand what you're saying. If he carries a condom with him in certain cultures, it looks premeditated. He's on the prowl. Yeah. He's got one thing on his mind, where in another culture, if he's got one, well, that's just common sense.
Exactly.
Let me ask you a question. First of all, Dr. Marty Klein said something about it was one of those healthy cultures sexually, and how they have a certain percentage of nude beaches. I'm horrified by the idea of being on a nude. I haven't seen myself naked since the 80s. You know what I'm saying? I remember that Jeff Foxworthy bit where he talks about, when you're young and you take off your clothes, you just take your time and struggle. Just take your time in broad daylight. But when you get older, you crawl to the bedroom in the prone position like you're being shot at. That's exactly what it's like. But you're a woman. So let me ask you this. He talks about women and young girls who dress provocatively, right? Do you believe that objectifies women, young women? Does it train them to be seen only as sex objects? Does it minimize them in the eyes of men?
I don't know. What do I think about that? I think a lot in our society, and this is just from my perspective. Obviously I don't know everything, but whenever I know a variety of people, like I know in my area, at least adults anyway, dress to the hilt, like very beautifully dressed. And I know that some of them are not sexual at all. Like, I think a lot of times people, even young girls, are more or less dressing for attention, period, from women and men, I guess. But I think what they really want to be, what I see, is just attention. They just want to be looked at as beautiful. And as far as, making them an object, I know that's a lot of people, say and think. I don't necessarily think that. That's just my opinion.
It's a hot topic. Well, look, men are visual. Men are stimulated visually. We are attracted to women visually. Women know this. Women have our number. They know exactly.
If a girl dresses sexual and then they get attention, then they should not be shocked. That's that always miss me whenever people dress provocative and they're like, oh, well, you wouldn't believe what happened. It's like, well, why wouldn't you believe it? Because if you're dressing that way. But and one thing that really kind of opened my mind is when I heard that if you take a large group of women and a large group of men, like in the group of women, there's a certain percentage in both men and women that a portion of them are very sexual and a portion of them are not as sexual. So often people think of men as the more sexual sex. And to me, that's just not true. I think a lot of times women, if they're more open about their sexual desires or, they're looked upon as a slut.
Sure. It's perfectly normal for a guy, right? He's got one thing on his mind. But if a woman shows any sexual initiative, well, she must be damaged goods or something. It's a tremendous double standard for sure. Elizabeth, thank you for the call. I've got Dr. Daryl Ray on the phone. I want to make sure that I can squeeze him into the show here and take some other calls. But thanks for your perspective. I really do appreciate you being part of the show.
Thank you very much.
Take care. I had, there's a small number of religious people who frequent the Thinking Atheist Facebook page, which is fine. It's designed as a community for atheists. It's not designed as an evangelical platform or a place where people can come and proselytize or educate us as to why we are deceived. I mean, the purpose of the Facebook page is not a debate forum. I designed it mostly as a haven for people who have rejected religion and want to interact with others of like mind. From time to time, religious people come by and they throw out some hackneyed, tired argument or what have you. And if they don't do so respectfully or if they clog the page, they're gone. But from time to time, there are people who use the page and they come in and they'll stir the pot. I don't mind disagreement. And there's a guy named Bob on the page, and he posted something today. And for the first time that I can recall, Bob got something right. Bob mentioned, of course, in the Bible, the Song of Solomon, which is, if you read the Song of Solomon, it is posited as an overtly erotic book. Song of Solomon, it's a series of lyrical poems organized as this kind of dialogue between a young woman and her lover. It's sort of a poem. I was going through the scriptures of the Song of Solomon, right? What was considered back then to be highly erotic, more proof that God loves sex and promotes it. Verses in the Song of Solomon like, "He shall lie all night betwixt my breasts." I sat down under his shadow with great delight, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. By night on my bed I sought him whom my soul loveth. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins. Thy lips, O my spouse, drop as the honeycomb. Honey and milk are under thy tongue, and the smell of thy garments is like the smell of Lebanon. Lebanon? Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates. Somebody stop me. I'm getting all steamy here. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits. Here's a classic out of the Song of Solomon. My beloved put his hand by the hole of the door, and my bowels were moved for him. It's better than late night cable, folks. But if you read the Bible in its totality, you see the extremely schizophrenic nature the Bible has when it comes to what is natural sexuality. And I want to talk about that with someone who has spent some time in the faith, Dr. Daryl Ray, author of The God Virus. Dr. Ray, you're with me?
I am. Thank you.
You were a true believer at one point. Is that accurate to say?
I went as far as to get a master's degree in religion at Scarrett College for Christian Workers, Nashville, Tennessee.
And what happened?
Well, I thought I was going to be a minister. I was pretty dead set on it until I got through my master's degree and figured that most of it, I couldn't believe it. So I slowly moved my way out. But I was involved in a very religious family, and it took years to finally move out of that. But I pretty much was a non-believer by the time I was at least by 35.
So if the title of your book or the subtitle of your book is any indication, you believe that religion infects the idea of sexuality. Would that be accurate?
Right. Now, you referred to my earlier book, The God Virus. My latest book is Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. But in both books, I talk about how religion infects people with crazy ideas and then uses that to infect their children and their children's children.
What are we talking about here? I mean, I've heard a lot of stories that it's dirty, it's shameful. They try to desexualize their children with the way they dress, the television they watch, the people they talk to, what they think, how much they are exposed to the outside world. But on the other hand, they say, but it's a beautiful thing to be shared only with the person you should spend the rest of your life with. So on one hand, they're going, oh my God, it's horrible. It's dirty. It's filthy. I'm dirty. And then they say, you should only share this with someone you truly love and will spend the rest of your life with. It's a weird kind of bipolar approach, isn't it?
It is. And it's well designed from a psychological point of view. It's very well designed. Because what you want to do is, from a religious perspective, is you want to teach them how to be guilty of something that they're going to do anyway. So let's teach kids how to be guilty about masturbating or guilty about premarital sex. Now, as long as you can get them feeling really guilty, then they're going to have to come back to the place they learned the guilt to get the forgiveness. So if you're raised a Baptist, you're not going to go confess your sins to a Catholic priest. If you're raised a priest, Catholic, you're not going to go confess your sins to a Muslim imam. So you learn the guilt in a specific place, and then you have to come back to that specific place in order to get free of that guilt. It's what I call in the book of God Virus, I call it the guilt cycle, and it's a perfect con game because you can't escape it. Once you learn the guilt, it's in you, and every time you do that thing, like let's say you masturbate or you have sex with your boyfriend or your girlfriend, now you've got guilt. You have to go get rid of the guilt. You get rid of the guilt, you get a bit of relief from it. And then the tension builds, and you go back and do it again. Every time you get a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper into the guilt cycle. It's very difficult to get out of.
Is that how those parental warnings were born? You'll go blind. You'll grow hair on your hands. God is watching you masturbate. You don't want God in heaven to be able to see through the roof of our house. Is that how that starts? I mean, they just instill the fear early or what?
Well, what religion does, it makes you feel guilty about something you're going to do anyway. We know that virtually every human being masturbates. The great psychotherapist that I studied with, Albert Ellis, the great psychotherapist back in the 70s, and he had a famous saying. He says 97% of men masturbate and the other 3% are lying. Well, that's not too far from women. We know that women masturbate somewhere in the neighborhood of 78 to 80% of women masturbate or have actively masturbated at some point in the time. So it's something everybody does. So if you prohibit people from doing something they're going to do anyway, they're going to feel guilty about it. They're going to come back to the religion that taught them that. So you've got to start very early teaching children what to be guilty of.
Talking here with Dr. Daryl Ray, let's address two biblical concepts. First of all, I'm sure you're aware of the concept that the reason that childbirth is painful and the reason that women are sexually obligated to their husbands is because Eve sinned in the garden. You've heard this before?
St. Paul said it in many different ways, yes.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is, Eve screwed up, and so mothers warn their daughters. They say, look, part of your curse that you have inherited is now you will have sexual desire and be obligated to your husband sexually, right? So now it's already a negative, and you will hurt like hell when you have a kid. Well, way to scare the crap out of your daughters, moms, as they grow up. But this must damage girls for decades, if not for life at times.
It does. And it distorts their sexuality almost from birth. And the main thing women are guilty of is being women in the Christian, Muslim, or the Hindu, or the Buddhist religion. And don't let anybody tell you Buddhism doesn't do that. Every one of the major religions make women feel guilty just because they're women. And it also shames women. All the major religions use shame as well as guilt. And it distorts people. It makes them do things that they wouldn't do if they were not being programmed with this religious craziness. Now, one of your earlier callers I was listening, he was talking about sexually transmitted disease and teenage pregnancies. Everywhere we look in the United States, the most religious states, the most religious zip codes have the highest number of teenage pregnancies, the highest number of STDs, and the highest number of abortions. So it shows us that religion is actually doing what it tells people not to do.
Is that a slingshot effect, though? Is it an overcompensation, right? You repress it, you repress it, you repress it, and then finally they swing hard the other way?
It probably is, because, the state with the highest porn use in the United States is Utah.
Those crazy Mormons.
and the number 2 state in porn use is Mississippi.
Wow.
So there's something going on there. You got the 2 most religious states in the nation, and they have the highest internet online porn use. There's a great book came out last year called A Billion Wicked Thoughts that actually looks at porn search engine results and stuff like that. to establish these statistics, and it's just hilarious. The more you're told not to do something, the more you're probably going to do it.
You know, those Mormons, you know, they're going, wear the fancy underwear for me tonight, baby. You know, wear the magic skivvies for daddy tonight. Second thing I wanted to address is we are talking about, for those who have tendencies to be attracted to members of the same sex, right? Homosexuality is addressed in scriptures. I was reading Bible Answers just to find out, again, get a fresh perspective on what fundamentalist Christianity says about it. And the website pretty much sums up what I had been raised with. Quote, much of our society has embraced many perverted sexual practices that are considered in the Bible as abominations to God. Homosexuality is among the list of deviant or abnormal sexual practices. They also include pornography, pedophilia, prostitution, bestiality, oral sex, phone sex, computer, virtual reality sex, and it goes on and on. But let's talk about how we're dealing with an entire culture that has no idea what to do with natural tendencies toward homosexuality, right? Attraction cannot be managed. You can't wake up one day and say, today I think I'll be attracted to a woman. You are attracted to who you are attracted to. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. And there's probably a great deal of genetics involved in it. And probably as much as 50 or even 70% of homosexual attraction comes right from the person's genes.
So you've got someone who is already probably at an early age, right, as they start to sexually mature, exhibiting tendencies toward homosexuality. Now the parents freak out. They go, oh, what are we going to do? We've got to get him in church. We've got to do this. We've got to do that. The relationship with possibly the father or the mother deteriorates. I know that's a common theme. And everybody is scandalized. And this poor child grows up in a state of confusion. What is your perspective on this? I mean, how has the church screwed this one up?
Well, they're distorting that particular child's sexuality. If there weren't religion around to tell him or her what she can and can't do with their bodies, they would probably find a pretty rational, normal, low-key, very pleasant way to live their life. But religion comes in and screws with that and says, no, you can't do the rational thing. You have to go against your own nature. I mean, it's like somebody says you have to go against your own nature. You can no longer eat meat. I mean, we as humans are meat eaters. So if you try to tell somebody we're natural meat eaters, you can't eat meat for the rest of your life. Well, that's crazy. You're probably not going to stick around with that very long. You're going to find meat to eat somewhere, and that's we're genetically programmed in these ways. We can't resist them indefinitely. We're going to have to pay a price. So that's why I subtitled Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality, because it is a distortion to force somebody who has a genetically predisposed attraction to pretend like there's something else. And you see people who said, I knew I was a homosexual when I was 7, 8, 10 years old, but I went ahead and married, and I had 3 kids, and then when I was 40, I finally decided it's time to be honest with myself. Well, that's 20 or 30 years of denying themselves. That's just crazy.
I see the persecution, too, I've got a dear friend who did the very same scenario you spoke of. He was told by his faith, his religion, his culture, homosexuality is wrong. He denied what he felt naturally innate. He denied his own attraction and his own opportunities to be happy, got married, right? Lasted 3 or 4 years. Fortunately, it wasn't 3 or 4 decades. Finally realized I am lying to myself and everyone else. And even though he has endured a tremendous amount of persecution and his road has been a very difficult path, I've never seen him happier.
Yeah.
You normally wouldn't choose this type of persecution. You wouldn't say, I want to choose a life path that will cause my entire community to throw stones at me for the rest of my life. But on the other hand, he is happy in his heart, and it shows from the inside out. It's amazing.
I've seen that many times in my own work, people who finally admit to who they are. And you've seen it too when people finally come out as an atheist, and wow, it's liberating. Well, gays are the same way. I've finally come out. I'm who I am as a sexual being, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore. And, that's something I really admire about the gay community, is in recent years, they have learned to just be who they are in public, and they're no longer ashamed of it. I really think the atheist community could take a lesson from the gay community and coming out and saying, look, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a religious person anymore. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a sexually uptight, puritanical Christian anymore. I'm just going to be who I am. And it's liberating. It's liberating for gays. It's liberating for atheists to do that.
Do you have a few moments to perhaps field a few phone calls here?
Sure.
Before we do that, though, I want to throw one more kind of a heavy topic out. Pornography. Healthy, damaging. What's your perspective?
Oh, absolutely healthy. Yeah. Humans are visually programmed animals, especially the male. He or she is going to look, and it's going to stimulate. If you look at Pompeii, when they excavated Pompeii, the Roman city that was destroyed by the Vesuvius volcanic explosion in 72 AD, when they excavated it, there was pornography everywhere. I mean, everywhere you looked, practically in Pompeii, there was graphic depictions of sexual acts. And if you look in some of the Egyptian art, you look at Sumerian art, everywhere you look in human history, there's pornography everywhere. Fertility goddesses, the goddesses that, I can't remember the Venus goddess that was actually much older than Greece. And so we know that humans have had pornography around for thousands of years, and it's no big deal. We even know that monkeys, chimpanzees, apes will look at pornography. So
pornography, photographs of what exactly? Are we talking about Chim Chim?
Yeah. That cute little chip gal over the other page or whatever. There's actually been experiments using photographs with chips, and they like pornography too.
I just have this. I'm trying to get the visual out of my head. There's like cheetah in a thong. I can't get it out. So you're saying that even primates look at provocative photos of primates. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly. They will be attracted.
I mean, primates other than us. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. No, it's hardwired, and it's very deep in our history.
The statistics on affairs and masturbation, I'm sure, are not all that accurate, but I would assume that inside and outside of the church, just like the divorce rate, it's everywhere, right? Religious, non-religious.
Divorce is actually slightly worse among religious people than it is among non-religious people. If you look at the states with the highest divorce rates are Oklahoma, Arkansas, very high religiosity states. The lowest divorce rates are in places like Massachusetts and Vermont. Religion tends to push people into divorce. We also know that ministers have the same divorce rate as the general population. So if religion really does work, then the treatment doesn't seem to be working for those guys.
I have an opinion that people preach against the thing they struggle with the most. So anytime I hear a minister who was railing on sex, or whether it's masturbation or pornography or homosexuality, my first instinct is to wonder if it's something that they are personally fighting and they are dealing with it by outwardly preaching against it. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Oh, I think there's a heck of a lot of truth to that. It's like the demons that you're fighting are the ones that you're going to preach against for everybody else, because you really think everybody else is dealing with it too. They may or may not be, but you have no way to know that. One thing I try to talk about extensively in Sex and God is how much religion forces people to keep their mouths shut. How does a married couple talk about sex if they've been taught from early on how so much of it is wrong? I mean, if you were taught from early on that menstruation is dirty, then how can you talk about having sex while you're menstruating? If you were taught from early on that masturbation is wrong if you're in a marriage, how can you talk about, I want to masturbate because you don't want to have sex with me, or you're gone for 3 weeks and I want to satisfy myself? You can't talk about those things. And religion forces people to keep their mouths shut about perfectly normal behavior and not communicate. I've got an entire chapter on how religion shuts down marital communication. And the worst place to learn marital communication is at a marriage encounter training session with religious people. It's the biggest oxymoron you'll ever hear.
Well, why is that? No, I mean, it's a celebration of family, how to have a healthy life. Usually it's an entire weekend, the ones I have seen. And then on a Saturday night, they plan a night for you to go out with your spouse. You have a romantic dinner. They encourage you, if you're comfortable, they encourage you to have a night of intimacy, of sex, to sort of re-energize. So tell me how and why that's wrong.
Ostensibly, that's what they're doing. But if you look at the rest of the weekend, it's a weekend of training in guilt. Because the religious training is you can only have this kind of sex in this kind of way, and we want you to go out and enjoy all the sex you want, but it has to stay within this very narrow range. If you step outside that range, then you're guilty. Well, everybody in that room is sitting there thinking, well, darn, yeah, I'd like to have sex in this other way and that other way. I'd like to have some oral sex, but this guy said it's wrong, or I'd like to have anal sex, that's wrong, or I'd like to have this or that, or I'd like to have a threesome sometime. But, of course, Jesus is the one that's in the threesome most of the time.
The Holy Trinity.
Exactly. So what religionists don't realize is when you're in that training, you're not getting trained in how to have better sex. I've been to many marriage encounter things. I've done them. I did all this stuff when I was religious. You do not learn how to have better sex. There's no training in how to have better oral sex. There's no training in whether, how to have safe sex with a third partner or anything like that. It's always Christian sex. It's always Jesus-based sex, which is a very tiny, tiny component of human sexuality. I mean, you can't even talk about whether you can use pornography or not while you're masturbating. Well, everybody who masturbates, or not everybody, but virtually everybody who ever masturbated has also used pornography in some way, shape, or form. But you can't even talk about that. So how do you do marriage encounter? How do you learn anything about your own sexuality and your spouse's sexuality if you can't talk out loud about it? And those things do not allow for that.
They used to say that regarding the missionary position, that was the one that God had ordained because the man and the woman are face to face as equals, right? You look each other in the eye and any other position. Now, this is something that was not taught overtly. It's not like they put it in the brochure, but it is implied that is the natural way to have sex. Anything else, whether it's oral or whether you guys are, bending each other into pretzel positions and doing whatever it is that floats your boat, any of that stuff is deemed as unnatural. So essentially what they're painting everything else with the shame brush, right?
Absolutely. Painting everything else with the shame brush. I think it's hilarious. I talk a lot about primate sexuality in the book, and I think it's hilarious. If you ever go to a zoo that has bonobo apes in them, bonobo apes also have sex in the missionary position. Bonobo apes also kiss each other just like humans do. The thing is that females are kissing females and males are kissing males. And everybody's having sex with everybody else in missionary position.
Wow. Monkey orgy going on. Yeah.
Because in the bonobo species, they're very closely related to us. They're probably the most closely genetically related species on the planet, even closer to us than chimpanzees. Sex is the currency of that culture. And it doesn't matter whether it's male-female sex, male-male, or female-female. That's very natural for that species. I'm
not Googling that either, Daryl. I'm not going to Google it. I'm just telling you. I'm not doing it.
I do have a quote, if you don't mind reading it, that speaks directly to what you were just saying. This quote comes from Christopher Hitchens. I quoted in my book. He says, "I always take it for granted that sexual moralizing by public figures is a sign of hypocrisy or worse, and most usually a desire to perform the very act that is most being condemned. This is why whenever I hear a big mouth in Washington or the Christian heartland banging on about the evils of sodomy or whatever, I mentally enter his name into my notebook and contentedly set my watch. Sooner rather than later, he will be discovered down on his knees in some dreary motel or latrine with an expired Visa card, having tried to pay well over the odds to be peed on by an Apache transvestite." That's hilarious. Only Hitchens could write like that.
It reminds me of the old Jimmy Swaggart "I'm sorry" speech. I mean, how many hookers does he have to get caught with before you realize the guy's a total horn dog? Look, I do want to talk a little bit more in depth about your book. Very quickly, though, let me squeeze in another phone call or two while we still have time. 775. Thank you for your patience. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
This is Kitty.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for waiting and for your patience. You are on the Thinking Atheist podcast with Dr. Daryl Ray. You got a question or comment? What do you think?
I've actually got a couple of comments. One, I actually got very lucky when it came to sexuality and religion. My parents are both Christians. They were not hardcore heavy Christians in the sense of, oh, don't do this, don't do that when it came to sex. My dad's idea of sexual education for me was handing me a bag of condoms.
Wow.
Flat out. That was my dad's form of sexual education. My mom, she gave me a book. By 4th grade, my parents had already let me take sexual education. Granted, I had it 3 years in elementary school. I'm like 7 or 8 before I had my first period, So my family got real lucky when it came to that. Now, as far as most people these days, I was just reading the Yahoo News on how Gingrich is yelling at Obama over forcing the Catholic Church to provide birth control and insurance. And I had gotten into an argument with a couple of Catholics stating that lust is not part of a healthy relationship. And I told them flat out that, you've got couples that are wanting to have nice, intimate relations with each other, and then at times they just want to fucking screw. It's part of a healthy relationship to look at pornography or be sexually active and not to have to feel guilty about it.
Right.
Say what you're really thinking, woman. You know what I'm saying?
You want me to say what I'm really thinking? Most of these religious assholes are fucking hypocrites who don't know left from right when it comes to anything about the world, especially sex. They're too damn scared to actually be themselves.
Newt Gingrich is still trying to figure it out. He's on his third wife. Maybe he'll finally get it figured out. Who knows? You were very lucky. I'll take my hats off to your parents. That was great.
Yeah, they were great when it came to sexual education. Granted, I almost got caught by my dad with my first boyfriend, but hey, who cares? I was protected.
I would care. I would totally care. Thanks for the call and have a great week. Appreciate you very much. Let's try 956. You're on the Thinking Atheist podcast. Who's this?
Hi, this is Daniel.
Thanks for your patience, Daniel. Have something for us today?
Yeah, I was listening to the show. I didn't get to listen to the whole thing, but just with regards to sexuality and religion, I know that early on, I had been involved in a youth group that was highly repressive. I got under the teachings of some pastor who basically would insist that before people dated in the group, they had to ask their pastor's permission, and, there was all this kind of repressive behavior that was going on. What I failed to see was that there was a lot of fucking going on. I was blind. I was one of those kids that, actually believed these people early on. And of course, it wasn't until much later in my life that I walked away from all this shit and got it all together. But religion, like Kitchen says, poisons everything, and it really screws people's sexual lives, and ultimately, it just poisons everything.
I think about people who are in positions of spiritual authority, right? You're a pastor, you're some sort of a church leader. I would think the temptation for that person would have to be overt. I mean, you're on stage, right? And you are in front of crowds of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people, most of whom adore you, who see you as a leader, who look up to you and all of those things. And you're given constant attention by the opposite sex or whoever, and temptation is everywhere. I mean, I would think it would be wildly difficult for anybody in that kind of position. You're doing the counseling sessions one-on-one, you're doing the nurturing thing, the hospital visits. You think I'm onto something here?
Absolutely. I have a chapter I deal with on that in the book about the alpha male. And as a species, we tend to have alpha males. And the minister is equal to the alpha male in that particular group. And what you might notice about church attendance is it's a 60 to 70% female. And women like to get close to that charismatic leader, and they're always looking to get a little closer than they probably should. And the alpha male, as we know from Muhammad and Joseph Smith and, any major, like David Koresh, the alpha male always wants more access to more females than anybody else. And if you just look at it as primate behavior, you will see that a lot of senior pastors in these big mega churches eventually get caught with their pants down. And and the ones that don't get caught are probably doing it anyway. They're just smart enough to have avoided it. When I was growing up, we had a minister who was caught 3 times before they finally fired him. Over a 10-year time period, 3 times.
Did he do the penance? Did he do the penance? I'm sorry, forgive me. I'm just a man. I'm only human.
He went before the board crying, just like Jimmy Swaggart did, and he got forgiven. That's the beautiful thing about Christianity is you can always get forgiven. They'll send everybody else to hell, but you can always get forgiven, and then they'll let you come back. And especially ministers, because it's really hard to find a minister is bringing millions of dollars into the church. You can overlook a little adultery here and there. And that's literally what goes on. They overlook the adultery because this guy is bringing in new members and lots and lots of money. So your caller is absolutely right. There's a lot of fucking going on behind the scenes. Just go to any singles group in a church.
Oh, my God.
It's really amazing. I mean, if you want to hit on somebody, if you want to get laid, go to a singles group in church.
Oh, my God.
You'll get laid a lot quicker than you can go to an atheist meeting, I'll tell you that.
Oh, absolutely. Some of the best fucking I ever had was with religious folk. I mean,
oh, yeah.
And what's interesting is that that same pastor now all these allegations have come out now that, well, he's a homosexual. I mean, he touched a lot of guys that I was with. These were guys that I had, were ministering with, that I, played on the worship team with and everything. And I'm sitting there going, when the shit what was going on? Not that I wanted that action, but I'm like, plus he had assaulted some women and had made some moves on all these different women. I'm thinking, where the hell? Oh, my God. I actually swallowed the Kool-Aid and believed, and I was trying to be a nice boy. And I'm thinking, really?
Yeah,
and
wow.
that was when I just said, the hell with this. And I walked away from it. And this was years ago. But it still lingers. That kind of the repression sometimes still comes in, and it can kind of affect some things. But it's interesting. But, yeah, some religious girls, man, just put out really quick.
Jeez, man. Thanks for the call.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
We had a guy in our research. He said when I became an atheist, he said, before I became an atheist, I could go into your own Sunday school class, and now they won't talk to me. I thought that's hilarious.
Look, maybe it's because I'm a prude, but it just sounds so predatory to say, "Oh, religious chicks, woo, man!" I mean, it just sounds like guys are waiting outside of the fellowship hall, waiting for these little demure women to come out to see which one they're going to pick off. It just wow.
Was it Billy Joel that said Catholic girls or have all the fun or something like that?
I guess.
And that's true. Every Catholic girl I've been with was a hell of a lot more fun than the Protestant girl.
Sex and God, how religion distorts sexuality.
I've never found a book like it. In the research to write this book, I could find no articles and no other books ever written on this subject. It's like the first time anybody's done it. And it's a book that needed to be written because nobody wants to talk about how religion impacts sexuality. And from an anthropological and sociological and psychological point of view, I don't write it like a textbook. I try to be very conversational, but all those disciplines kind of inform what is a human being without religion. If you didn't have religion, what would your sexuality look like? And it's hard to know that because we're so inundated in this Christian culture of ours. It's almost impossible to know what real human sexuality should be like.
Are the reins kind of loosening in here in America? Are we starting to get a little less uptight?
Well, it's hard to tell. I think for some subgroups it is. I think those who are becoming more secular are starting to break free. But, there's so much programming. Even lifelong atheists have been programmed into some of this craziness about their own sexuality. I mean, you've called yourself a prude 3 or 4 times on just this one radio show. So somebody programmed that into you. And I don't think it was an atheist that did that.
It's true. I mean, let me say that most of the people who were authority figures in my life growing up, if they said sex, the word sex, their face would twist up so that they looked like one of those trees in The Wizard of Oz.
Yes, exactly. You're right.
They'd go, sex. I mean, it was like they had to just get the word out. And it's hard to overcome that. It took a long time. And honestly, only being an atheist since I was 38, I'm 43, pushing 44 now. my ideas have radically had to change. I mean, it used to be homosexuality was a sin. These people were condemned. God burned whole cities because of it. And now I look at it and I see it in a whole different light. And that's been the case with almost everything that religion taught me growing up. It's like seeing the world in many ways for the first time. It's crazy.
Yeah, but very liberating at the same time.
Well, what I hear, though, is that they say, well, you know what? Because you've rejected God, you just want to do whatever you want sexually. I had an apologist come to town, and I actually went and listened to his weekend seminar, and he said the words from the podium. The reason people reject God and embrace atheism is because they want to act however they want sexually. And that's the excuse they give, right? You want to go out and pervert God's gift and screw sex up. You want to do it your way. And that's hard to get past.
Yeah, it is. Well, religions are programming you from very early on. When you look back from your age or my age, we don't recognize what was happening biologically and biochemically in your body, in your brain. But when you're going through puberty, hormones are flowing, and your brain is literally reprogramming itself. It's preparing itself to move into the next phase of reproduction. And the impact of external environment at that point in time can be enormous. And that external environment includes religion in this case. And what we know is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the experiments with geese, Dr. Tinbergen did 30, 40 years ago, imprinting. You can imprint a goose to follow a human and ignore their natural mother if you just don't let the goose see the mother for the first few hours after it comes out of the egg, and only let the goose see the person. Well, the same thing kind of happens in humans. With whatever you're exposed to in your culture when you're about 12, 13, 14 years of age is probably what you're going to imprint to. And we know this is true because entire cultures imprint to different body types. I mean, that's why you got cultures in Africa with women with enormous butts. Because in that culture, though, that is seen as desirable, and so those women tend to reproduce more. But what's going on biochemically is that kid at 13 years of age wakes up sexually, or 12 years of age, wakes up sexually, and then his brain's looking around saying, okay, I know I'm supposed to be turned on, but the culture has to tell me what to be turned on by. It's really an interesting phenomenon. And once you understand that, you realize, wow, you were programmed at 13 years old to like women with a certain body type, to like women with a certain voice, or like women with a certain facial expression. And that's probably going to stay with you the rest of your life. And that's why a lot of people struggle with later in life with certain sexual predispositions, because they didn't really choose it. It was imprinted on them at that point in time.
Talking to Dr. Daryl Ray, before I let you go, someone's listening and they carry with them still, even to this day, feelings of shame. I mean, they have sexual desire, but on the other hand, they feel dirty. They feel worthless. They feel like they should be ashamed. I shouldn't be thinking or feeling this way. I shouldn't, something's wrong with me. I'm broken. What would you say to someone like that?
Well, you used a word that is the key to changing all of that. I actually have an entire chapter written on it, and that is the word should. Shouldshood leads to shithood. So don't should on yourself. Get rid of the shoulds in your life. It should put you in a cage. Anytime you start saying, I should do this or should do that, look at the programming has been done to you. Because shoulds tell me, shoulds are the religion talking in your life. You are not thinking for yourself. If you're using a lot of shoulds and you are not thinking, you're acting on previous programming. And that's actually the direction I take with people when I work with them on their sexuality. Let's get rid of these shoulds that you've got, because shoulds create guilt. And guilt is exactly what religion wants you to have, so that you'll come back and get forgiveness.
Life's too short to live in a cage, worrying about living by someone else's leave, by their standards, by the shame that they essentially projected on you. Just let it go.
Exactly, right. Get rid of it. So that would be my key point of advice. Let's get rid of the shoulds. And then learn how to live your own life in the most respectful and safe way. I mean, there's no evidence that atheists go out and have crazy, wild sex. In fact, there's evidence that the religionists are doing crazy and wild things and unsafe things, much more unsafe than the atheists are in this world. Atheists at least know to use a condom. But a 16-year-old girl who's never been taught anything doesn't know to use a condom.
A fascinating book, Sex and God, Dr. Daryl Ray. Sex and God, How Religion Distorts Sexuality. You're a great guest. Thanks for spending 45 minutes with me on the air and answering our caller questions and being so full of good stuff. You got a lot of wisdom to offer, and I appreciate the time you spend here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's probably something we could cover again in depth down the way. I do eventually want to do an entire show on religion as it relates to homosexuality. I know that's an extremely deep topic, and because coming out as an atheist is a lot like coming out as a homosexual, according to a lot of people who interact on our pages, there are so many parallels, and they talk about what they repressed, right? Just like you repress doubt, just like you repress all of the natural questions that you have. This doesn't make sense. I want to be true to myself, but my family says I should be ashamed. I shouldn't be having these thoughts. I shouldn't be doubting. I shouldn't be doing any of this. And you repress it before you know it. You're filled with self-loathing. You live your life in denial. And then finally, hopefully, you come to a point when you say, screw it. I'm going to find out whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever fits, and I'm going to do that. So I think down the pike, I'd like to do eventually a whole show on that. And obviously find some people who can speak with authority about what some of the challenges are and opportunities, how to better understand how religion totally mismanages the concept of homosexuality. We'll talk about that and a whole lot more. Thank you so much for a frank, very entertaining, and fun show. And I'll catch you next week on the Thinking Atheist Radio podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.